Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a podcast where we talk about HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Dieter Veldsman, and today I'm joined by Jan Laurijssen, HR Evangelist, SD Worx. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Jan, before we dive into our topic today, let's get to know you a little bit more. So I'd love for you to share with the listeners today, what has been some of the best career advice that you've received that stuck with you over the years?
I've gone through several changes, but I think the best advice that I ever got was, in case of doubt, jump. Because as you know, we do a lot of research also together with the Antwerp Management School about careers, sustainable careers, but now also more and more about inertia, career inaction. I think that we have to inspire people and motivate people to think more and to jump more, because as we move along and as a number of technological advancements are changing the way we work, we should help people to jump quicker, faster, and more sensibly.
I love that. And I think the inaction component in careers is such a big challenge that we find within the HR space. And you and I have spoken about that before, that very often HR professionals either don't know how to manage their careers or they're very hesitant about taking those big risks as well. Jan, what drew you to HR as a career?
Well, it was not my first career choice. I graduated as an educational psychologist, so I was meant to go into education and to help kids with educational problems like ADHD and so on. But at some point, something came along, and I was invited for a company to come for a talk. That was the beginning of the 2000, to talk about e-learning. And I got into e-learning, and that basically took off from e-learning to educational publishing, from publishing to Wolters Kluwer, professional education, from professional education to SD Worx, broad HR, consulting.
I love the undertone there of human development that kind of cuts through all those different career aspects. And I think that sets us up really well for our topic today, Jan. Both of us are very passionate about HR, and we believe that there's a positive future in HR and there's so much opportunity on the horizon. There is a raging debate at the moment around HR operating models. There's the group that says, we have what we need, it's all about the skill and we just need to implement it better. There's a group that says that the world is changing, we actually don't know what it needs to look like, we need something different. And then I find most people kind of caught in the middle in this hybrid that we need some elements, but some of it is no longer working, so we need to reassess. Why is the BP model still the prominent model? And for those that don't know, how would you describe that model?
Well, I think HR BP model dates back to the models that have been developed by Dave Ulrich, where we actually go for a center of excellence on a corporate level, where a number of specialists get together, where we have a service center that actually services mainly employees and leaders in the organization with transactional, with administrative tasks. And we have some business partners, HR business partner, their role is mainly to support and advise the businesses as such on anything related to the people side of the business. Let's call it that. I think that is still a very prominent model. But as you said, it's been debated a lot, because if you look at it from a developmental model or a maturity model, we can ask ourselves where we are at the scale and whether, like you said, it's still valid. I think it's still valid, but with everything going on, labor market shortages, AI, technology dropping in, changing work, changing the way we work, I think it's going to evolve in some way. Where exactly it's going to end up, I don't know. But definitely, if we look back at the basic role model from Ulrich, and you think about administrative expert, you think about employee champion, technology is changing so much in that field alone, then we can ask ourselves, in terms of change agent, in terms of strategic advisor, how are we going to balance that in the end? But I think also in terms of employee experience, there is a lot that technology is already facilitating that is helping us to do a better job as HR professionals. And then we can ask ourselves, what time is that freeing up to do other stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of important things, Jan, that you've mentioned. And the first one is, I think what HR has always done well is we've responded to, firstly, the needs of the environment and how the implication of that on the business itself. Now, whether that was industrialization, whether that was globalization, whether it was the fourth industrial revolution. And I do think we are facing a new chapter of work that is about the digital and the human interaction
Yes.
and interplay. And that has to then change certain ways of work. And when I talk about ways of work, I'm not talking about, remote or hybrid. I'm rather
No.
talking about the essence of what an organization does. And to your point, I think where the real opportunity for HR lies is around the fact that we finally have the technology, I think, to be able to automate and through AI to be able to complement and augment a lot of HR work that in the past wasn't necessarily possible. Automation doesn't solve everything. It solves a lot of things, but not everything. And then to your point, I think also the shifting role that somebody like a CPO or a CHRO changes around real business continuity and sustainability has definitely changed. So I'm also of the view that I think the HRBP model is still very relevant. I do think that there has to be an adaptation of that going forward as businesses change and align to what the business requires, because we shouldn't overcomplicate an HR model just because we want to and we can.
No.
We should do so because the business is requiring that from us, and that is really what is required.
Like you said, I think it's evolution. And although some are preaching revolution, I'm still hesitant to think about it in that way. But also if you think about, first of all, how AI and technology is changing work at the moment, we also have to think about how it's changing the work of HR. Like we said, we had the administrative expert, we had the service centers in the past. That definitely is going to be changed by technology, and it's going to help us in a much better way. And I think AI, what you said, basically is going to help us to do the work that we as humans do best, which is human work. Meaning that if the technology can help us to nudge people, to nudge leaders, to think about what is really important in the day-to-day business, in the day-to-day employment relationship. If it can help us to nudge people and to nudge leaders, to think about their careers, to give them hints, to give them something to talk about. Hey, people that are in your job, they've been doing this for 3 years, are usually thinking about something else. What do you think? Is this the moment to talk about this? I think something comes into play that maybe wasn't too much of an importance in the past, is that we're going to help facilitate change through leaders. Leaders are the first line of defense. Let's call it that.
I think that's crucially important, right? Because speaking to various HR professionals, which you do the same, there's a couple of comments I hear quite a bit, right? How do we get line managers to do what they are supposed to? How do we stop line managers from outsourcing people management to HR and then pulling HR kind of into the very operational relationship management component, which actually exists between the line manager and the employee? And then I think on the other side, also that more proactive stance around how can we use things like data and insights and previous trends that we have seen to start equipping people better for the future and really nudging those types of actions that I think is going to make all the difference. Jan, I want to shift a little bit and I want to play devil's advocate for a moment and get your view on the following, right? So when I speak to a lot of HR professionals, they would always talk about, and a lot of our clients come to us and they ask the question, how do we make HR more strategic? How can we work with our HR business partners to be more strategic? I'm going to take the stance and saying, I don't think BPs are strategic. Love your view on that and see if you think any different.
I think it's too harsh to say that they are not. I think they should become more strategic. When we do the work that we do with Antwerp Management School, we usually talk about 3 perspectives. We got the employee or the talent perspective, we got the employer perspective, and we got the labor market or the legislative perspective. I think HR BPs are right in the middle of that triangle to balance the needs of the organization in terms of capabilities, the needs of the employees in terms of what they expect of the employment relationship, and the needs of what is happening, whatever is happening in the market, both in terms of labor market, but also in terms of legislation. Balancing that, bringing those together will actually make you to become more a strategic business partner than possibly they are now. Where we are, like you said at the beginning, we organized HR as a service model, and that requires another view, that requires a broader perspective, that requires insights in the evolution of technology, that requires insights in how technology is changing the way people work.
There's a couple of things for me that also contributes towards that, right? I think exactly to your point, I think when we've redone HR operating model reorganization, very often we've done the BP a disservice. I think not providing them with the adequate transactional operational support that the model requires to really work.
Mhm.
I've seen that various times. The symptoms you find is BP's being pulled down too much into day-to-day type of queries. So I think that service center perspective is important, but it is only one part of the bigger whole. And I think sometimes we get very stuck on that particular piece. So I definitely agree with you that there is this point that I think we can help BPs also understand their role differently than what it is today. And I think there's a component around also educating the business around what does a good BP look like and what should you expect from a BP, because I often find in that relationship there's still some challenges.
Yes. And there, I think what really could help us is from both sides, if we can bring the data to the table, if we can bring people analytics to the table and talk about strategic challenges, and we can actually look at the data, at the analysis that we have, that might also actually help to bring HRBPs also to the Excode table, to the directors table, to see how are we evolving, how are we doing on the age pyramid, where is reward taking us, what's the market doing in terms of reward, how do we bench against that, do we want that, do we refuse to go with that trend, what should we think about a workation, is that something valid in our employee proposition, how many people would want this, but again we have to support this with data and with analysis, with evidence. We're big supporter of evidence-based HR, to actually think about what is true, what makes sense to do, and what is actually contributing from the people side of the business to the business side of the business.
And there's something for me in a good BP right around that curiosity to find out why certain things happen within the organization. Whether that's through certain hypotheses or trying to dispel certain assumptions that we've made over time in the organization around why certain things happen.
Yes.
You make the point around evidence-based HR. We're also very firm supporters of that as AIHR. That does require a different skill set, I think, from an HRBP in terms of infusing data into the way that we think about the world and the way we engage with our stakeholders and build certain arguments. Something for me that I hear quite a bit. It doesn't mean HR professionals are going to all have to be data scientists, but it means that it is a different way of working and a different way of incorporating that with your stakeholders. And I think that's a big transition that HR BPs need to make. It is about how do I utilize what is available to me and have different conversations.
Yeah, and I think there a number of people are also advocating this new role or this new competence, the analytics interpreter, as something that is for the moment still lacking, I think, in a lot of organizations. I don't think that we need a particular data scientist for that. There are, of course, larger organizations investing a lot in people analytics and so on. They have their own people analytics department. But dealing with data and understanding what it says is just one part. So we do need to get back to the point, like this is a core competence for any HR professional to be able to deal with data. But it also means that dealing with evidence means also like, does this actually make sense? Can we find any scientific evidence to support this idea? It also means that can we talk to stakeholders, what they think, what they need? Can we refer to experts that are actually into this field and bring that together and build a case for what we're trying to say, or to build evidence for the question that we're trying to answer? But I do think it's becoming very, very important that we invest in critical thinking, analytical and both synthetical thinking when it comes to data. Because also, like AIHR, a lot of tools are evolving towards integration of generative AI with people analytics, basically meaning that we can ask the system anything and it generates a report, including your graphs. So if we can't interpret anymore or evaluate what it generates, then we're in real trouble.
We talk about analytics translation and sense making, because I think that sense making component around, what is it that I'm looking at? What does that mean? How does that apply? And to a large extent with things like generative AI, does this make sense and is it truthful around the reality that we find ourselves in? So, Jan, the elephant in the room is Gen AI, right? So there's all these conversations at the moment around how it's changing the work of HR, how it's changing what the HR professional needs to do in future. Talk to us a little bit about your view on how Gen AI is actually going to change the world of HR.
I think, like in any job that deals with content and know-how, generative AI will impact the job of any HR professional, and some more and some less. We also know from research For instance, Stefan Strohmeyer did already a lot of research on that. Um, Actually, AI and generative AI have been around for quite a while, specifically in selection and recruitment, where we have to generate text, for instance, anything there makes sense. Also in matching of vacancies and candidates, AI has been around quite a lot. So there, I think what is happening is that we have to learn to accept there's a new friend that's going to be part of our work. And it's not a he or she, it's a thing, it's a tool, and it could help us with generating more content than we can ever do. But we also have to be critical about where it finds its content, what are the sources. But I do think, and we all have been trying to use it, we all been testing it to some extent. It does create a basis to work on when you're writing a vacancy. It does help us to make a report of a conversation that we have. I've had my first experiences with recording video, running it through tools, and then finding out that I'm perfect in Italian, which is maybe yeah, not really that important. But if we think that you're working for an international company, and as you know, where in Europe languages are important, yes, it actually makes sense to address my colleagues in Italy in Italian. So yes, we are finding a new way of collaborating with a tool that is becoming part of our work. It's changing the way that we work, and that is facilitating the way we work. So it's very exciting if we can stay very critical also about what it does.
I'm also a firm supporter of the augmentation opportunities that it provides,
Yes.
right? So I don't, yes, it will replace certain tasks and activities. It will also allow the opportunity for other tasks and activities to be born around things that we haven't even thought about yet.
Yes.
And I think if we can start having that type of mindset in HR, that it is complementary and it augments what I already do.
Yes.
And I actually think it can buy you, besides now the productivity gains and quality benefits, I think it can buy you thinking time around certain elements. And I think sometimes that's what we lack a little bit, just because everybody's fighting fires to say, it's not about what I get done. It's a little bit more about why am I doing this and is this the right thing? You know, a lot of the things that we've been talking about requires mind space for people to be actually able to think critically about it as well. And I do think that there's, you know, some significant opportunities here if we are open to really encapsulate and incorporate AI in a responsible way. You know, you've mentioned thinking about the privacy concerns and where the data comes from. What is interesting though in our research at the moment, with just more than 1,000 HR professionals around their use of, you know, ChatGPT, obviously not the only Gen AI out there, but there's this big group in the middle. There's this group that's very neutral about that and very unclear and unsure of how to utilize it, should I be utilizing it, and what does good utilization look like? And I think we need to nudge there a little bit around, be open to experiment a bit more, be open to try it out, you know, and then from there learn from it. And I think your point you made earlier is so important around, don't just trust everything at face value.
Yeah, two things. First of all, I think if you talk about it in that way, then basically it's the next step in the process of automation, digitization, analytics, moving towards AI. So it's evolution. And we do feel that it's faster than ever before. And probably it is because we've unleashed it to so many people. Where previously a lot of technology was tried out, released in an environment of a company, but not on this scale. And now everybody is tasting it, feeling it, knowing it. So that's a good thing too, because it means that everybody as a citizen is actually experimenting this. You're going to have to build capabilities in your own organization, in your own HR organization, to at least understand what's going on. And you called it I called it the interpreter, you called it the translator. Well, basically, same thing. But we're going to have to build human capabilities in the HR organization to be able to deal with this in a sensible way.
Jan, I want to move us on a bit around careers. What's changing in the career of the HR professional? And you mentioned inaction and inertia a little bit earlier. And if you can talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, so we've been doing research together with Ans de Vos for over 12 years. And we started off 12 years ago as actually a non-topic. It was not popular at all, has now become something that is very, very important. It's in general careers, but also looking at HR careers. Inertia in action has become a topic the last couple of years because we see that if we survey people and we ask, "Are you thinking about changing jobs?" I think 1 out of 2 mostly says yes. If you look at reality, at least in Belgium, their mobility is low, and in entire of Europe, mobility is quite low. So I think that given this new environment, this new future that is not clear yet, I think a lot of people are just stepping on the brake and looking at what's going on and what's happening. Before what I said in the beginning, in case of doubt, jump. We should nudge them to do that and make sure that there is a path to cover the ground or the gap that is still there. And the problem now is, or the challenge that we have, I think, with a lot of jobs, as you mentioned also before, is that we acknowledge there is a gap. We're just not sure how big, how small, what it exactly means against a future of AI in HR, for instance. Yeah, I think we're going to have to comfort people, educate people, guide people to think about what's the next step and what's going to make me jump. Why would I jump? It's as easy as that. So career counseling also for HR professionals is becoming increasingly important. That's also why, for instance, in our own organization, we are organizing an internal labor market to make it easier for people to find out what's open, what's up, and what's the next thing. Because that's the hardest thing if you want to choose, is if you don't know what the options are, it's very hard. So then you know what the options are, then we can think about how big we think the gap is, and then we can start thinking about how we can get there. That also applies for HR professionals in the end, I think.
The big thing for me, and that's what some of our own research has also shown, is a lot of HR professionals don't know what the opportunities look like, and they don't know what is possible because they're very restricted to the organizations in which they've operated. And a large majority of HR populations will operate in organizations where the HR team might be pretty small. So you don't even have the view of the full spectrum of what HR does in bigger and larger organizations or different contexts. And then to your point, that exploration component around, but it's not just about what the next opportunity looks like and when it becomes available, but there's a bit of intention behind it in terms of why does that matter to me? What do I want out of my career? Out of our own research as well that I've shared with you before is, the career satisfaction of HR professionals is not that great. But a lot of that stems from the fact that we don't measure it against anything else. People don't talk about career success is subjective, right? So they don't think about, but what does that look like for me? And what is meaningful for me in my career? And I think that's something that we need to help HR professionals with a little bit more. That self-awareness piece around what do you want out of your career and why is this important for you?
I agree. And I think also from the past, we referred already to operating models. We referred to typical org charts in the HR organization. Implicitly, I think we've lost the opportunity that implicitly it says that you're either an HR BP, you're either in excellence, or you're either in services. I think that there are a lot of opportunities if we start thinking about combining roles. Why can't you be an HR business partner for half of the time and be an L&D expert for the rest of your time? Why can't we start combining those roles and get the best out of people? Also, if we look at this from a longitudinal perspective, chances are slim that you hop from one job to the other job, but that you're always in transition some way, and that we help people to move forward take time for a year to do 60% of what you've been doing and learning already 40% of what is coming up.
We talk about something called, on the operating model level, from silos to solutions, which is a little bit around this idea that, traditional roles, I think, pigeonholes people quite a bit. And I think there's only certain parameters within which people can operate. I'm a much stronger supporter of giving people exposure to different elements and stretching them, because I found some of the best, specialists in HR in the center of excellence were people that does have BP experience or have had BP exposure and vice versa. And I like this idea also around making sure that your best people are equipped to go and solve the biggest problems that will have the biggest impact, regardless of which home they belong to in the organizational structure. Because I think an org structure is something to organize work, and it's something that you need for certain, processes to be able to run effectively. In my view, that's not necessarily what needs to guide the actual day-to-day around what happens in the organization. I think it's a little bit more open than that. This idea around, skills marketplaces and this idea around opening up talent in the organization to do different things requires a very different mindset and culture in the organization, but I think it is worth it. And that's where the whole conversation around, skills-based organization stems from as well. And I think it's interesting if we as HR also think about ourselves in that way. It's not just enabling the organization, but also ourselves to operate in that particular perspective as well.
And that brings us back to the careers again. Like how are we biased against careers as well? There are also some biases in the whole idea that you move towards HR business partner because you are experienced. You move to this. So we had a meeting yesterday with some of the partners of the Next Generation Work consortium, and Ans de Vos asked the question: who has a high potential program for 45 plus? I was like, yeah. No, nobody does. And
Exactly.
and from a life and career point of view, that actually makes sense, because maybe on your 45, and I started studying again at 48. It actually makes sense from a life perspective, because it opens up time at that point in life
Yeah.
again to do something else, maybe to do something more even, or to work harder to pick up a new job. Whereas before, when you were trying to get your family raised, to buy a house and so on, there was no time. So we have to bring in also that perspective of where are you in life? What do you think is important? How can we help you move and remove a lot of the biases that we have implicitly, of course, towards careers, and when people are likely to jump?
I think there, the point also around understanding people as human beings with lives outside of just work.
Yes.
And not thinking about work as a linear progression over time. I think that opens up a lot of opportunities, especially around things like late stage careers. We're seeing with
Yes.
labor market changes that you've mentioned, people work longer, people work in different capacities.
Yeah.
But working longer does not mean I just extend my current career in the same shape and format from, 30 to 40 years. I think it means that there's different opportunities on how you structure work. There's portfolio careers that we could look at there as well. So I think there's so much opportunity if we do think a little bit differently about some of the parameters. I spoke to an organization earlier in the week, and I smiled because the CPO was chatting to me around how they utilize age as a criteria for talent pooling. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's very limiting. And, these days, age is not necessarily a predictor of the exposure somebody would have had or the experience, because work is unpredictable and people follow very, very different paths to be able to get to different elements.
If we can think more and more, and this is happening in any workspace, about the personalized employment relationship. That is basically it. If you want to build a relationship as an organization with an employee or a freelancer or whatever, make sure that you cater for the needs of this person, how he or she can contribute, or what works in life. And that's also what helps, I think, for any HR professional in the future. If we can translate that to HR careers, means that we're going to have to think about, like you said, not just a linear career going from junior to and so on, but making moves of sideways, upwards, downwards, upwards again, across time. So, and then I prefer to talk about time and not age.
Jan, I want to start wrapping up for us, and I think a couple of key points that really stood out, and thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us. I think the first one is around the fact that the HR BP model still has a place. However, we need to be realistic around the context within which it finds itself. We need to look there in terms of what does that next evolution look like over time, and how does it serve the organization best. I think that was a key thing that stood out.
Let's place that in a maturity model, where it comes from and where it's moving to. There is a past, there's a present, and there's a future for this model.
Love that. And I think also then the conversation around with things in the future like Gen AI, we need to be open and realistic around how that's going to change the work of HR, how that will influence the type of skill sets that HR professionals need. We spoke quite a bit about the data and the analytics component, the role of interpretation, the role of sense making, of translating analytics into tangible action, and absolutely also the point around how that will influence the way that we think about HR careers. Love the fact that we spoke about the urge for HR professionals to think a little bit broader about their own careers and some new opportunities on the horizon, but also that we need to set that up in an organization so that the organizational environment thinks differently about how can we equip and enable careers in general, but for our conversation then specifically into the HR space as well. Where can people find you and find out more about your work and the work that you do at SD Worx?
I'm at LinkedIn. You can find my LinkedIn profile, and also you can find a lot of information on our blog sites, where we publish a lot of the things, where you can also find some videos of myself talking about AI and the world of work. And of course, also on the website of the Next Generation Consortium of the Antwerp Management School.
Perfect, Jan. Thank you very much. And until we speak again, thank you.
Looking forward to that.